Hi, my name is Luna. They said it was just a casual family gathering at Pacific Hills Country Club, nothing fancy. Just a simple evening with a few drinks and finger food. That's what the message said. Except, the message wasn't even sent directly to me. It came through Scarlet. Scarlet, Jason's sister, forwarded it to me like an afterthought. No greeting. No personalization. Just a clipped text that read, "Just making sure everyone relevant has the info." Relevant. That word sat in my chest like a stone. I stared at it for a full minute, debating whether to respond, to ask a question, to remind her I was Jason's wife and that I've been part of this family for almost 6 years. But I didn't. I'd been down that road before, and silence had always felt safer than confrontation with the Blackwells. Jason noticed the look on my face as I put my phone down. Probably just one of Mom's charity nights, he said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. You know how she likes to make things seem exclusive. Just show up. Be nice. Be nice. That's always the ask. Isn't it so? I went, dressed in a cream blouse with soft pleats, a navy blue pencil skirt, and a single gold pendant that used to belong to my grandmother. I kept it simple, polished, but not loud, respectful, but not trying too hard. My makeup was light, and I wore my wedding band with quiet intention. I looked appropriate, but appropriate doesn't mean welcome. As I pulled up to Pacific Hills, the sun was melting into the horizon, painting the sky with burnt orange and pale lavender. I sat in the car for a few seconds longer than I needed to. Just breathing. Just bracing. Inside, the air was cool and sterile. White marble floors, towering glass chandeliers, and the faint clink of expensive silverware from a room somewhere deeper in the club. At the front desk, a young man in a tailored vest glanced at me. "And you are Luna Carter," I said softly. "I believe I'm here for the Blackwell event." He typed something, frowned, typed again. "There's a Blackwell reservation in the West Room, but your name isn't listed." Of course it wasn't. My chest tightened. Before I could even respond, a bright, cutting voice rang out from behind me. "Oh, she's not on the list," Scarlet chirped as she approached, heels clicking across the marble like judgment in staccato. "But just let her through, she's family." Technically, she offered that smile, the one people wear when they're pretending to be gracious but would rather be anywhere else. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes and leaves paper cuts on your pride. I followed her through a set of double doors into the West Room and walked straight into a scene from a luxury fashion magazine. Black tie dresses, diamonds, tailored tuxedos, waiters weaving through the crowd with trays of champagne and foie gras. This wasn't casual. This wasn't simple. This was curated opulence. I glanced down at my outfit, suddenly aware of every fiber. It wasn't that I looked wrong, it's that I looked like I hadn't gotten the real invitation. "You're just here for optics," I told myself. "Smile. Stay small." Scarlet gestured to a round table tucked in the back, near the swinging kitchen doors. "Temporary," she said too sweetly. "We're waiting on a few last-minute RSVPs." It was the only table with no centerpiece. No guests. Just an empty plate and a folded napkin. I sat alone. The sound of servers moving through the kitchen bled into the room. The clatter of trays. Soft orders yelled through the swinging doors. I folded the napkin in my lap and stared down at my untouched water glass. A few feet away, Scarlet leaned toward her friend and whispered loud enough for it to travel, "Billionaires don't sit by the kitchen." But hey, at least she showed up. They laughed. Quiet. Sharp laughter that cut sharper than any scream ever could. I didn't move. I didn't react. But in that moment, I wasn't Luna. The marketing director. I wasn't Luna. The wife. I wasn't even Luna. The woman who used to believe that if she dressed right and smiled enough, she'd eventually be seen. No, I was just Luna. And somehow, that had become unacceptable. They say you can tell everything about a person by the table they give you. My table was small. No linen. No flowers. No name card. No champagne glasses. Just a dull silver butter knife. An untouched water pitcher. And the distinct chill of being placed where no one would notice if you stood up and walked out. The kitchen doors behind me swung open every 30 seconds. Servers flowed in and out like a tide balancing trays of hors d'oeuvres. Flutes of golden champagne. And stacks of empty dishes. Every time they passed, the warm air from the kitchen brushed the back of my neck like a reminder. You're in the way. It was a spot reserved for someone they didn't want seen but couldn't completely deny. I smoothed the napkin across my lap. Burgundy. Crisp. Expensive, but for some reason, it reminded me of the small-town diner I worked at in college, the kind with chipped mugs, tired waitresses, and permanent coffee stains on the counter. The same color napkins. Though, strange how memory sticks. I glanced around the room. Trying to look casual, everyone else's sparkled. Literally. Sequins. Jewels. Velvet gowns cut to precision. Every woman looked like she'd walked out of a Vogue editorial. Their laughter floated across the chandeliers like confetti loud enough to fill the space. Soft enough to remain exclusive. I took a sip of water, wishing it were something stronger. To my left, a group of women clustered at a high table. One of them leaned in Aunt Evelyn, I think, and murmured to her friend with a chuckle. She must have thought this was a PTA brunch. Her friend laughed. Not with cruelty, but with comfort. Like she agreed. Like it was a harmless joke about someone who didn't matter. And maybe that's what stung most, not the words themselves, but the ease with which they were said. A server approached my table with a tray of drinks, his arm extended, then paused. He looked at the list on the back of his hand, then at me, then said, "Oh, sorry. This tray's reserved." He pulled back, his cheeks flushing as he walked away. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I'd learned not to make others comfortable when they made me invisible. Somewhere across the room, Charlotte was talking to a man in a navy suit. She tilted her head in that signature way, all elegance, all performance, and then, without even glancing my way, said to him, "If you dress like the help, you get seated like the help." He laughed. Too loud. I pressed the napkin tighter into my lap, trying to ground myself. I could have left. I should have. That would have been the healthy thing, the boundary setting. Therapy approved. Strong woman thing to do. But I stayed. I always stayed. Because I believed that if I just endured long enough, someone would see me. That if I didn't make a fuss, they'd realize I belonged. That if I sat quietly, they'd eventually pull up a real chair and say, "We're sorry. You're part of this." But they never did. And I don't know what was more humiliating, their cruelty or my hope. A woman in emerald green approached the table beside me, sleek, tall, laughing softly into her wine. She noticed me, smiled vaguely, then pivoted away before I could return it. Her heel clicked as she walked. 1, 2, gone. A server tripped slightly as he passed behind me. The tray wobbled, then stabilized. He didn't look back. I stared at my empty plate, wondering how something so clean could feel so hollow. That's when the question hit me. What would they do if I just stood up and left? Would Scarlet pretend to be confused? Vivian roll her eyes? Would Jason even notice? Probably not. They'd say it was dramatic, that I was sensitive, that I misunderstood the tone. And then, almost like on cue, I heard Scarlet laugh again. Softer this time. To the woman beside her. At least she didn't try to wear red again. Last Christmas was enough. They laughed like it was an inside joke. Like I wasn't sitting right there. Like I hadn't spent an hour last December trying to figure out whether burgundy counted as festive or inappropriate for the Blackwell formal photos. That night, Scarlet had worn emerald. Vivian had worn silver. I had worn the wrong thing. Again, I turned my gaze to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the hills glowed under the last light of day. It was peaceful out there, free from curated cruelty and cocktail politics. But I wasn't out there. I was here. And even if they wanted me to feel small, I was done shrinking. That moment, not loud, not cinematic, was the beginning of something quiet but irreversible. Because I wasn't angry yet. Not fully. But I was awake. The clatter of cutlery, the hum of conversations, the music, soft and elegant. Everything around me kept moving. Pretending I wasn't there, like I was part of the decor. One of those things that's always in the background but never actually seen. I took another sip of water, though my throat was already dry. Somewhere between the kitchen doors swinging behind me and the soft click of heels across the floor, I had stopped feeling human. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just detached. And then the room changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even dramatic. It was like a breeze had cut through the heat of a suffocating day. The doors opened. Not from the kitchen behind me, but the main entrance to the ballroom. There was a subtle pause, a ripple in the noise. A few heads turned. Then more. Conversation dipped. Forks hovered midair. Jason walked in. Tall. Composed. Tailored. Gray suit. No tie. A collar open just enough to look expensive without trying. His expression was unreadable, not angry. Not surprised. Just grounded. He didn't scan the room. Didn't look for Scarlet or Vivian. Didn't offer polite nods or empty smiles. His eyes locked onto me instantly and he walked past the bar, past the servers, past Scarlet, who had frozen mid-laugh with her champagne flute in the air, straight toward me. I didn't move. He stopped at my table, the one by the kitchen. The one with no centerpiece. The one they'd placed me at like I was a forgotten purse someone had to deal with. And without a word, Jason pulled out the empty chair next to me and sat down. Like it was the only seat that ever mattered. The hum of the room faded into something thinner. The music kept playing. But it sounded distant now. Tinny. Even the servers slowed. The kitchen door behind me swung once, then didn't swing again. I glanced sideways, expecting him to say something. He didn't. Instead, Jason reached for the burgundy napkin, still folded neatly on the table, the same one I hadn't touched. He unfolded it carefully, placed it on his lap, and exhaled softly. Then he turned his head, just enough to look at me. That was it. Just a look. But it said everything. I see you. I felt my spine straighten without thinking. My pulse slowed. Not because I felt safe, I didn't, but because I suddenly realized I wasn't invisible anymore. Across the room, Scarlet was frozen like a statue from a Greek tragedy. Her smile had evaporated. Vivian sat at the head table, one manicured hand wrapped around a glass of white wine, finger her other resting on her chin as she watched her son sit not with the family, but with me. She raised an eyebrow, just one. But her silence was a blade. "Jason," Scarlet called, trying to recover with a sugary tone. "You weren't supposed to be in town until tomorrow." Jason didn't turn to her. He reached for the water glass in front of him and replied, "Calm as ever." Plans changed. Then, after a pause so heavy it almost cracked the room in half, he added, "Where else would I sit but with my wife?" The word wife landed like a dropped microphone. Someone coughed. Someone else set a fork down too loudly. The pianist at the far corner of the room missed a note but kept going. Nobody dared speak. Vivian finally broke the silence. Her voice smooth, but cold like velvet wrapped around ice. "We had a seat for you up here." "Darling." Jason didn't even glance her way. "I didn't see Luna's name on your guest list," he said, placing his glass back down without spilling a drop. "So I figured your table wasn't for us." Us. Not her. Us. That word did more damage than a public argument ever could. Because they hadn't just dismissed me. They had counted on Jason doing the same. They'd bet on him choosing them the legacy. The image. The comfort of familiarity. And he hadn't. That wasn't part of their plan. A junior staffer appeared beside Jason's shoulder, clearly rattled, holding a notepad and trying not to sweat. "Sir, if you'd like, we can move you and your, Mrs. Carter to the front." Jason cut in, his voice soft but firm. "We're fine here." The staffer nodded and vanished like vapor. Around us, conversations resumed. But they didn't sound the same. Every laugh felt forced. Every smile strained at the corners. People kept looking at our table, not out of curiosity, but like they were trying to understand something that didn't make sense. How do you erase someone who refuses to disappear? Jason picked up a small dinner roll, broke it in half, and began eating like this was just another Wednesday night. No dramatics. No speech. Just presence. And that more than any grand gesture shifted the gravity of the room. I didn't thank him. Not yet. Because this wasn't about gratitude. This was about clarity. And clarity had just walked in, pulled out a chair, and sat down beside me. The thing about silence is that it gives space for everything hidden to rise. After Jason sat down, the room tried to recover its rhythm. People sipped champagne more quickly. The band leaned heavier into the next melody. Laughter came, too louder than before, like they could laugh past the discomfort. But beneath all that noise, I could feel the truth blooming. They hadn't expected him to come this setting. And certainly not to sit here. From across the room, I watched Scarlet lean into Aunt Margaret, her lips barely moving. Voice low and tense. Margaret, the family's gatekeeper of gossip, nodded, without breaking eye contact with her drink. Then I saw Scarlet's jaw tighten. She snapped something in a whisper. I didn't catch it all. But I heard two words, his assistant. And then, from Aunt Margaret's not-so-hushed reply, but he's not in Miami. He's here. And this changes everything. That was when I knew. This wasn't a simple oversight. It wasn't someone forgetting to add my name to a list or assuming I wouldn't show up. This was precision. Premeditated. Pre-approved precision. They'd made sure I wasn't invited not because of a miscommunication, but because my absence was the plan. My seat near the kitchen wasn't a last-minute shuffle. It was a placement. A message. A punishment wrapped in hospitality. And the worst part, they didn't think I'd have the backbone to notice. But I did. I remembered. Suddenly, something Scarlet had said a week earlier. I'd walked into the back sunroom at Vivian's estate just as she ended a phone call. I hadn't thought much of it then. Something about headcount and non-disruptive seating. At the time, I assumed it was for the gala or maybe the charity auction. Now, and that moment clicked into focus like a puzzle piece snapping in. We need her quiet. This isn't about her. Her. They were talking about me. They'd been orchestrating this for weeks. Strategically shifting the energy. Setting the tone. Slowly. Methodically. They were uninviting me from my own life. I looked around the room and saw it with new eyes. Vivian at the head table, smiling as if she were the queen of some mythical dynasty. Scarlet draped in midnight silk. Sipping wine like power lived in her stemware. Jason's cousins. 2 tables over. Deep in conversation about market mergers, never once looking in my direction. It wasn't just exclusion. It was erasure. I breathed in. Slow and steady. Not shaky. Not angry. Not yet. Jason reached for the breadbasket again. Calm. Focused. He hadn't said anything else since sitting down. He didn't need to. His presence here had already said the only words that mattered. You are not alone. But he didn't know what I now understood. This wasn't a passive slight. This was an active decision. I thought back to Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Vivian had looked at me across the dining table after I spent 6 hours making pies from scratch and said with a smile, "You've got a lovely voice." Reminds me of that intern Jason had in Chicago. She was prettier. But same tone. Everyone laughed. I did too. Because I didn't know how else to survive it. But now, as I sat by the kitchen doors watching Charlotte's wine swirl in her glass, I realized something they hadn't just hoped I would fade away. They had built a system where that fading would feel like my own fault. They'd called it etiquette, tradition, taste. But it was exile. Dressed in pearls. A server passed behind me again. This time with plates of sea bass and roasted fig. The scent made my stomach tighten, not with hunger, but with clarity. They had chosen their narrative. Now I had to choose mine. Jason glanced over. "Everything okay?" he asked. Voice low. I nodded. Not because I was okay, but because I didn't have the words yet for what was rising in me. A quiet sort of burn. Not rage. Not bitterness. Conviction. I turned back toward the ballroom just as the lights dimmed slightly for the next course. Soft jazz began to play. People resumed pretending. But I wasn't pretending anymore. Not for them. Not ever again. The bathroom was too bright. The kind of sterile light that doesn't flatter, it exposes white marble countertops, gold fixtures. A subtle lavender scent pumped through hidden vents. It was the kind of powder room designed not for comfort, but performance, a place to fix your lipstick before returning to a world where perfection is expected. And authenticity is a threat. I stood there alone. The mirror didn't blink. My reflection looked calm. Composed. The soft pleats of my cream blouse still neat. My lipstick still intact. Nothing out of place. But I leaned in anyway, just close enough for my breath to fog the glass. Then I whispered to myself. Quietly, but firmly, let them see what grace looks like. I stayed there, letting the words settle in my chest. They didn't feel defiant. They felt rooted. Because this wasn't about revenge? Not really. It was about being seen without needing to shout. About holding your place without asking permission. About refusing to disappear not through anger, but through presence. The door creaked open behind me. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I knew the scent of his cologne. Jason, "You okay?" he asked. His voice soft. I gave the kind of answer women give when they've been dismissed too often and have run out of softness to spare. I'm fine. He didn't believe me. I could feel it in the silence that followed. You want to leave? He asked after a pause. I looked at him through the mirror, and I saw it, the exhaustion around his eyes, the quiet tension in his jaw, the weight of standing between a legacy and a love. He didn't look tired from work. He looked tired from pretending. So I told him the truth. No, I said, calmly. I'm ready to stay. His brow lifted slightly, not in surprise, but in curiosity. And watch, I added. There was a beat of silence, a long one. He didn't speak, just stood there beside me, unsure of what to say next. That was always the thing about Jason. He was loyal. Yes. Kind. Sometimes. But he wasn't brave with confrontation. Not when it came to his family. Still. He nodded. He didn't question me. He didn't argue. He simply stepped aside and opened the door for me. Like he always did. But this time, I didn't walk through it for him. I walked through it for me. We didn't return to the table right away. Instead, we paused near the hallway's end, just beyond a tall fiddle-leaf fig and a massive planter. It offered cover from the crowd, but gave me the perfect view of the room I was about to re-enter. From here, I could see Scarlet leaning forward, her whisper now frantic. Her hands fluttered, like she was recalculating a game she thought she had already won. Vivian was staring at the empty seat beside her, her lips pressed into a tight, bloodless line. They were nervous. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel nervous at all. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't rehearsing my expressions or calculating how to be likable. I was just ready. The music shifted. Dessert was being passed. Towers of raspberry tarts and sculpted mousse moved from table to table. It was the right moment. I stepped back into the ballroom. But I didn't just return. I arrived, one foot in front of the other. Not hurried. Not hesitant. Each step deliberate. Each breath calm. My heels clicked softly across the polished floor, not a storm. Not a parade. Just the quiet sound of someone no longer shrinking. And this time, they saw me. The conversations didn't stop, but they dipped. Eyes lifted. Posture straightened. It wasn't fear. It wasn't admiration. It was adjustment. People don't know what to do with a woman who doesn't ask to be accepted. I reached our little table by the kitchen. Still there. Still slightly wobbly. Jason was already seated. A fresh glass of water waiting in front of my empty plate. The napkin I had left behind was folded again perfectly. Like a reset. He looked up. Gave me a quiet nod. I nodded back. That was always our way. No theatrics. No performance. But the room noticed anyway. They always do when you refuse to follow their script. And somewhere deep inside, a voice I hadn't heard in a long time whispered, "You belong nowhere they try to erase you from. You belong everywhere you decide to stand." And I stood, even if I was still sitting. You see, the thing about being underestimated for long enough is that eventually they stop watching. And when they stop watching, that's when you start building. I sat quietly, my dessert untouched. A silver spoon rested beside a beautiful lemon tart topped with edible flowers. It was the kind of thing Vivian's guests ate with tiny bites while pretending not to count calories. But I wasn't thinking about calories. I was thinking about information, about patterns, about how silence can teach you more than power ever could. Because while they spent years treating me like I was invisible, I had learned everything about them. Vivian's obsession with image, Charlotte's need to be adored. Margaret's addiction to gossip as currency? I didn't just survive in this family, I studied it. And what they never realized is that I never wasted a single moment. I knew who handled the estate taxes. I knew which nonprofit accounts Vivian used to quietly maneuver money. I knew which donors were real and which were shell names. Jason's uncle invented to avoid scrutiny. I knew which events were curated for public perception, and which ones were privately funded for control. And most of all, I knew the paper trail they hoped no one would find. Because I was the one who made most of it look clean. They thought I was just the pretty wife, a quiet woman with a smile, a polite nod, and a perfect memory. They never realized that behind the polite nod was a woman who spent every Tuesday night cross-checking statements while Jason slept, not because I was suspicious, but because I wanted to understand the empire I'd married into, and now I understood it better than they did. I looked up as Charlotte stood, raising a glass in a perfectly poised toast. Her voice rang out, soft and confident. "To family," she said. "And to legacy." Legacy. That word again. I watched her. The way she turned slightly to show her best angle. The way she held her chin up like she was born into relevance. I remembered how she used to walk past me in the hallway and greet me like I was staff. I wondered what she'd say if she knew I'd spent the last 6 months preparing documents quietly, legally, thoroughly. I hadn't just built a case. I'd built options. A foundation board seat with full voting rights. A legal audit of one of their shell charities that had conveniently lost over $400. Ling. Screenshots. Paper trails. Emails they never knew I was BCC'd on. Why not? Because I wanted to ruin anyone. Because I needed to be ready. For this, right now, Jason leaned toward me slightly. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Just above a whisper. I met his eyes. "I'm thinking." "They never saw me coming." He frowned. Confused for a moment. But I didn't explain. Not yet. Because the real power wasn't in the documents. Or the accounts. Or the facts. It was in the silence. The kind that builds. The kind that studies. The kind that remembers. They had spent years performing for each other. And I had watched all of it. Charlotte's toast ended. Applause followed. Rehearsed and clean. Then Vivian stood graceful, commanding, and the room instantly hushed. She gave her own speech, full of elegance and empty sincerity. Phrases like shared values, and honor, and tradition. She glanced in my direction once, a flicker of annoyance masked as civility. But I didn't flinch, because I was no longer playing her game. I had my own, and it had already begun. I reached into my purse, nothing dramatic, and slid out a single black envelope. Jason didn't notice. Nobody did. It was small, sleek, sealed. Inside, an official notice from the independent firm I had quietly hired 6 months ago, a full audit request of the family's charitable foundation. Scheduled. Approved. Irreversible. It would be in Vivian's inbox by morning. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. Because power isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's a woman with a glass of water, sitting at a table by the kitchen, with a lifetime of receipts tucked silently in her hands. And while they performed legacy, I had already rewritten mine. I found her near the side veranda, where the soft glow of lanterns lit the garden path in gold. Charlotte stood with a glass of red wine in her hand. She posed against the railing like she belonged in a glossy magazine about dynasties and curated legacies. Her laugh rang out a little too loud. Here's a little too rehearsed as she charmed a small group of guests with a story I'm sure she'd told 100 times before. But tonight, Her audience was losing interest. I could see it in their body language, polite smiles, wondering eyes, shifting weight. Her power, once magnetic, was slipping. And I was done waiting. I stepped forward. Not aggressively. Not loud, but with certainty. Like a woman who had nothing left to prove and everything in her possession. Scarlet, I said gently, but with weight. May I have a word? She turned, her face performing the surprise before her brain could catch up. Luna, she said. Her smile, a blade wrapped in satin. Of course. How? Unexpected. We stepped aside into a more private alcove. Just behind the tall garden urns. I could smell the hydrangeas, soft and fading under the evening breeze. She took a sip of her wine. Composed. Didn't think you'd make it tonight. I know, I replied. That was the idea, wasn't it? Her lips parted slightly, the smile faltering. I'm not here to fight. I continued. I just want you to hear something. Then you can go back to your guests and your curated performance. She crossed her arms. Say what you came to say. I took a breath. Not out of nervousness, but to ground myself. For years, you made me feel like I had to earn my place. Like love had to be proven. Like belonging was some kind of currency I couldn't afford. I let it slide. I stayed quiet. I dressed the part, smiled through the digs, nodded through the exclusions. Her expression was unreadable. Maybe she didn't expect this tone. Maybe she expected tears. Or begging. But the mistake wasn't what you did to me, I said softly. The mistake was thinking I didn't notice. She said nothing. I leaned in slightly. You and Vivian thought this night would be a celebration. Of control. Of continuity. But you forgot that the people who serve your power understand it better than you ever will. Scarlet scoffed. So, what? You're making threats now, after all this time? You want a scene, no scene. I replied calmly. Just a shift. She blinked. What does that mean? It means the audit has already started. It means the foundation's accounts are being reviewed. It means your paper trail isn't as clean as you thought. And it means I'm not leaving. Not your family. Not this table. Not this narrative. The color drained from her face. Just slightly. She recovered quickly. Years of social armor don't fall easily, but I saw the crack. You've gone too far, she said through clenched teeth. This will backfire. You think Jason will protect you. This isn't about Jason. I said. It never was. And I don't need protection. I stepped back, giving her space to breathe in what I'd said. You built a world where I was expected to stay silent. And now, you're uncomfortable that I've chosen to speak not in rage, not in gossip, but in facts, in law, in truth. Scarlet turned her face slightly, hiding her expression from view. You'll destroy him too, she said. He's part of this. I'm not out to destroy anyone. I said, but I am done letting you script who I get to be. She stared at me. Something flickering behind her eyes, fear, maybe, or respect. I couldn't tell. You always said I didn't understand how this world works. I continued. But that's not true. I understood it better than anyone. I just never wanted to be like you. And with that, I walked away. No grand exit. No dramatic turn. Just steps quiet. Certain. Irreversible. There's a strange thing that happens when someone everyone ignored suddenly becomes the most powerful person in the room. At first, they pretend not to notice. Then, They start whispering. And then, they start realigning. That's exactly what happened the morning after the gala. The emails went out early. The audit was confirmed. A polite, carefully worded message from the legal compliance office began circulating, requesting clarification on certain financial discrepancies involving the foundation forehead requesting the foundation and... It wasn't accusatory. It was simply precise. By noon, it was all anyone in their circle could talk about. Not openly. Of course. This world doesn't deal in open confrontation. It prefers passive-aggressive charity brunches and back-channel phone calls. And in that quiet whirlwind, something beautiful began to unfold. The whispers weren't about Scarlet anymore. They were about me. Luna. The woman who had always smiled. The woman who remembered names, anniversaries, and the preferences of every board member's spouse. The woman they thought was there to decorate, not to lead. Now they weren't so sure. Jason's cousin Rachel, who once corrected my pronunciation of Montecito at a luncheon, sent a message asking if I'd be open to speaking at her next Women in Legacy event. Vivian's longtime assistant, Clarice, called me privately just to say, "I always knew you were sharp. Just wanted to tell you that..." Even Margaret, the matriarch of social maneuvering herself, reached out with a carefully arranged brunch invitation. No agenda stated. But I knew. They wanted to understand who I was now. But I hadn't changed. I had simply revealed myself. And with every text, every glance, every nervous smile I received in the days following the audit notice, I realized something: power doesn't always have to be seized. Sometimes it arrives when you finally stop handing it away. Jason noticed it too. One night, as we sat on the balcony overlooking the canyon, he turned to me and said, "It's like they're seeing you for the first time." I didn't look at him. I just sipped my tea and replied, "No. They're seeing what they refused to see before." He nodded. Slowly, with something like guilt in his eyes, but also awe. "I should have stood up for you more." He said, "You still can." I answered, not accusingly, just honestly. Because here's the thing, when you stop seeking approval, you stop fearing loss. That's when you gain freedom. And when you're free, people start listening. The following week, at a regional philanthropic roundtable, I was asked to fill in for Vivian, who claimed she was not feeling well. Everyone knew it wasn't illness. It was optics. She didn't want to answer questions. I walked into that boardroom in navy-structured, clean, and unmistakably mine. I had my notes, my research, my clarity. But most importantly, I had presence. Halfway through the session, as we discussed ethical fundraising practices, someone asked me directly, "Where do you think we've gone wrong in managing trust?" I didn't hesitate. "We went wrong." I said, "When we started treating legacy like a shield instead of a responsibility. Transparency isn't a threat, it's the bare minimum." There was a pause. Then a slow wave of nods. And something else: respect. Not performative. Real. After that, the shift became undeniable. At meetings, people asked for my opinion not as a formality, but because they genuinely wanted to hear it. At dinners, they angled their chairs toward me. At home, Jason asked me to review proposals before his team submitted them. The tide had turned, not because I had yelled, not because I had exposed anyone with scandal, but because I had built something solid in silence, and now it could no longer be ignored. One evening, Scarlet called. Her tone was clipped, professional. Just wanted to let you know the legal team is cooperating fully with the audit. She said, "No need to escalate." "I'm not escalating anything." I replied, "This isn't personal. It's just what's right." She exhaled. Long. Tight. And then, softer. "You played the long game, didn't you?" I smiled to myself. Even though she couldn't see it, "No," I said. "I just stopped playing yours. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of day that didn't ask for anything special, no holidays. No headlines. Just a regular morning with a chill in the air and the scent of fresh espresso clinging to the kitchen tile. I was sitting in the study when the envelope arrived. Cream-colored. Hand-delivered. Embossed with the family crest. Still clinging to its old weight like a monarch, refusing to admit the people had moved on. Inside, an invitation. Vivian was hosting a family council, a private, urgent gathering at the estate. Meant to clear the air and reaffirm mutual respect. The kind of meeting where apologies come dressed in metaphors and truth is diluted until it tastes like diplomacy. I could have laughed. Months ago. They wouldn't even mention my name unless it was followed by a sigh. And now they wanted peace. No. They wanted control. But something inside me stilled. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about how I wanted to be remembered, not by them, but by myself. So I went. I wore gray. Not black. I wasn't mourning. Not white. I wasn't here to forgive. Just something steady. Neutral. Like stone. When I entered the grand hall, they were all already seated. Jason, at the far end. Eyes low. Scarlet. Arms folded tight. Still wearing her defense like jewelry. Vivian at the center. Composed but pale. The queen's posture. But the fear was visible now. Her hands trembled. Just slightly. As she set down her teacup, "Luna," she began. Standing. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, but said nothing. We wanted to speak face to face. To avoid further misunderstandings, I raised an eyebrow. Which misunderstanding are we referring to? The public audit or the decade of private dismissal? The silence was deafening. Vivian swallowed. "There were mistakes," she said. "But this family has always found its way back through unity." I stared at her. Unity, that's what they were calling it now. I looked at Scarlet. "Do you agree with that?" Her jaw flexed. "I think we've all contributed to the tension." A non-answer. I looked at Jason. "And you?" He hesitated. Then quietly, "I should have listened to you sooner." There it was. The closest thing I'd get to an apology. I took a breath. "You all taught me a valuable lesson," I said. "That sometimes silence is not grace, it's complicity. And that respect built on fear isn't respect at all." I opened the folder I'd brought with me. Inside were the final summaries of the audit. The discrepancies. The misallocations. The names. The legal paths forward. I could have passed them across the table. I could have dropped a bomb and walked away. But I didn't. I closed the folder. Slowly. And said the one thing none of them expected. "I'm not pressing charges." Vivian blinked. "You're not." "No," I said. "Because that would only perpetuate the story you all have tried to write for me, the angry outsider. The woman who dismantled the family. But you have every right," Charlotte said. Eyes narrowing. Confused. "Exactly," I replied. "And choosing not to use that right, that's my power. Not yours. Not the law's. Mine." They sat there. Stunned. Because they'd been prepared for war. But I came with truth. and something they'd never considered I might possess mercy. I leaned forward. But let me be clear, this is not forgiveness. This is not forgetting. This is me choosing the future over the past. You can rebuild this family's name, but not on the backs of women who've been silenced. I stood. I'm founding a new branch of the foundation focused entirely on ethical leadership, transparency, and empowering unheard voices. I'll be its first chairwoman. Vivian opened her mouth to protest. I didn't let her. You won't stop it. Because the moment you do. This file, I tapped the folder. Go public. Not for revenge, but for accountability. The room froze. And then, slowly, Vivian sat down. She didn't agree, but she understood. Jason stood, came beside me, and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. Not possessive, just proud. I looked around the room. One last time. They hadn't changed, but I had, and that was enough. Because legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you choose to leave behind. 3 months after the meeting at the estate, Luna stood in front of a packed auditorium in San Francisco. The room was filled with young women, community organizers, philanthropists, former interns, all drawn by one question that had been quietly circulating across the country. Who was the woman who changed everything without raising her voice? The foundation's new arm, renamed the Glasslight Initiative, had become a headline in its own right. Not because it replaced the old, but because it revealed what was possible when a woman decided she didn't need permission to lead. Luna walked to the podium in a navy silk blouse and black trousers. No jewelry, except for a simple band on her left hand. Her hair was pinned in a low, loose knot. Composed. Luminous, like someone who had walked through fire and come out, not just unburned, but brighter. The crowd quieted as she began. Hello. My name is Luna. She said simply, and I wasn't supposed to be standing here. A soft ripple of knowing laughter followed, the kind that comes from people who've lived through the same unspoken rules. I was supposed to stay gracious. Stay quiet. Stay grateful. I was supposed to smile at cocktail parties while being dismissed in boardrooms. I was supposed to be proud of proximity to power, not realize I had it all along. She paused. I know many of you have felt the same. You've watched decisions being made in rooms where your name was used but your voice wasn't welcomed. You've watched opportunities pass to those who assumed leadership belonged to them by default. She looked out over the crowd, locking eyes with the young girl in the front row, no older than 18, clutching a notebook to her chest like it was armor. But here's what they never taught us. Legacy isn't inherited. It's chosen. Every day. By the way we speak. Show up. And refuse to be erased. A burst of applause. Luna smiled, not humbly, but proudly. She had earned this moment. What followed was not just a speech, but a blueprint. She outlined the initiative's mission: mentorship for women of color in nonprofit leadership, transparent funding education, legal support for whistleblowers, a rotating board that required 60% representation from those historically excluded from philanthropy, and it was working. Small local organizations had already begun reporting increases in donations, media coverage, and most importantly, internal culture shifts. But something even deeper was happening. People had started telling their stories, not just survivors, not just fighters, but women who had simply existed in silence for too long now, writing, speaking, reclaiming their place in history, not with outrage, but with ownership. 1 week after the launch, The Atlantic ran a piece titled "The Luna Effect: How Quiet Grace is Reshaping Power." Luna never commented publicly on it. She didn't need to. She had work to do. In private, her life had also changed. Jason had stepped away from the old family board and now served as an advisor to the Glasslight legal team. Their marriage was still healing, not through grand gestures, but through the quiet rebuilding of trust, brick by brick. They had started gardening again. On Sundays, just the two of them. Dirt under their nails. Coffee mugs resting on the porch steps. No legacy. No politics. Just presence. And once a month, Luna wrote letters. Not emails, letters. To women who had reached out, some in broken handwriting, others in polished stationery, thanking her for giving them permission to believe in their own stories. But Luna didn't believe she had given them permission. She believed she had reminded them they never needed it. One night, while preparing for an upcoming panel, Luna found an old photograph tucked into the back of a notebook. It was from her early days with the foundation. She was smiling, standing just slightly behind Vivian and Scarlet, like an afterthought. She stared at it for a long time. Then she slid it into the drawer and closed it softly. Not out of bitterness, but because the woman in that picture no longer existed. She had grown, and growth. Real growth requires you to leave behind the version of yourself that made others comfortable. As Luna turned off the light and stepped into the quiet hallway of her home, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt steady, and sometimes, in a world that thrives on noise and spectacle, steadiness is the loudest revolution of all.